Mark chapter 7, verse 24. He got up and departed from there to the region of Tyre. He entered a house and did not want anyone to know it, but he could not escape notice. Instead, immediately after hearing about him, a woman whose little daughter had an unclean spirit came and fell at his feet. The woman was a Gentile, a Syrophoenician by birth, and she was asking him to cast the demon out of her daughter. He said to her, "Let the children be fed first, because it isn't right to take the children's bread and throw it to the dogs." But she replied to him, "Lord, even the dogs under the table eat the children's crumbs." Then he told her, "Because of this reply, you may go. The demon has left your daughter." When she went back to her home, she found her child lying on the bed, and the demon was gone. Jesus continues to show a lack of discrimination as he ministers to the people in Gentile areas. Though his Jewish counterparts consider Gentiles to be unclean and less than human, Jesus continues to visit these areas and provide miracles. He's again unable to avoid crowds and finds himself in the recurring situation of people falling at his feet and begging for help. But instead of being moved by compassion or splanchnizomai this time, Jesus decides to test her faith. Jesus probably already knew that the Gentiles were a lot more humble in heart, so he may have been trying to make a point to the Pharisees that were probably following his company around, trying to get him arrested. So he makes a statement to the woman that would have easily offended a self-righteous person, such as the Pharisees, who have been doing nothing but getting offended by Jesus. He points out that the Jews are God's children and the Gentiles are just dogs. So why should he give the children's food to the dogs? How many of us would have been offended if a religious leader, or let alone anyone, considered us to be less than human, even if they were offering help? We'd probably rather not accept help from such a bigoted person. But this woman reveals that becoming offended is only a luxury for the self-righteous. Those who are humble, meek, broken, and desperate receive whatever help they can get. She replies to Jesus in a way that displays such humility, saying, "Dogs at least get the crumbs that fall from the children's table," implying that she's not too good for Jesus, that there's nothing he could say to offend her. Jesus is pleased by her humble faith and gives her what she wants. Verse 31, again, leaving the region of Tyre, he went by way of Sidon to the Sea of Galilee through the region of the Decapolis. They brought to him a deaf man who had difficulty speaking and begged Jesus to lay his hands on him. So he took him away from the crowd in private. After putting his fingers in the man's ears and spitting, he touched his tongue. Looked up to the heaven, he sighed deeply and said to him, "Ephphatha," that is, "be opened." Immediately his ears were opened, his tongue was loosened, and he began to speak clearly. He ordered them to tell no one, but the more he ordered them, the more they proclaimed it. They were extremely astonished and said, "He has done everything well. He even makes the deaf hear and the mute speak." The entire journey through the Gentile regions down to Decapolis was around 120 miles. That would have been about a 2-day journey non-stop. So they probably had to clear out a good week to include sleep and making stops. This shows that Jesus didn't minister to the Gentiles because they were always there and it wasn't too big of an inconvenience for them. But he went well out of his way to minister to them. If he, for some reason, actually considered them to be dogs, then it was a very Western view of dogs, where they're more considered to be like family members than merely animals. The last time Jesus was in this area, they asked him to leave because they were afraid of him. After seeing Jesus drive demons out of a man and into 2,000 pigs that ran off a cliff, they probably thought he was some sort of god from the underworld and thought he would bring destruction to their land. But Jesus, who usually told people to not talk about the miracles that he did for them, he told the man who just received this exorcism to go throughout Decapolis sharing what had happened. The people were amazed by his testimony and were now ready for another visit from Jesus. So this time, when Jesus returns, they would bring to him a deaf and mute person who would get healed, and their perception of Jesus would change completely. They would realize that he is a good God and that his motives are good. Perhaps now they are ready for the gospel as well, since Jesus now asks them to also not spread news of his miracles. He has caught their attention with a show of power, but now wants their attention moved to the more important matter of the gospel and salvation. A couple of prayer points. Number one, God may not refer to us as dogs, but he does refer to as sheep, which are some of the most helpless animals incapable of taking care of themselves. Why do we need to act less like the prideful Pharisees and more like the humble, broken Gentiles? In what ways am I more like the Pharisees, and how does that keep me from growing closer to God? Number two, how do I go out of my way to help those who are marginalized by society? How can I better spread the gospel to those who are ignored by our mainstream culture?